3 days passed. Harrison Ford had not said a single word to the press. No press releases, no interviews, no apology. And still, his silence filled every space louder than words. What started as a moment on live television had become something else, something deeper. News anchors debated it in primetime. Political pundits discussed the fallout like it was a geopolitical crisis. On podcasts, voices clashed. Was Ford standing up for artistic integrity? Or had he let pride ruin an important conversation? Back in New York, The View continued, but the mood had shifted. The audience still clapped, but not as loud. The conversation still flowed, but something invisible was missing. Even the producers felt it. The air wasn't the same. During that week's Friday episode, Whoopi Goldberg broke her silence again, this time in the middle of a panel discussion about celebrity responsibility. "I've known Harrison for years," she said, her voice steady. "He's not a man who fakes his emotions. He says what he feels, and that moment on our show, it wasn't scripted, it wasn't staged. It was real." Joy nodded, trying to soften the moment. "We were all caught off guard. But maybe that's the point," Sunny added. "Maybe we've all gotten too comfortable pretending everything's okay." For a brief second, the table was quiet again. Not tense, just honest. Later that evening, a new headline emerged. Harrison Ford sends message to young filmmakers. It wasn't an interview. It was a short video uploaded quietly by an indie film school in Chicago. Ford had recorded it a month before the interview as a favor to a student documentary. But now, in the current moment, the words felt prophetic in the grainy clip. Ford sat in a cluttered office, wearing a flannel shirt and speaking directly to the camera. "If you're telling stories to be liked, stop," he said. "If you're telling stories to be true, keep going even if no one claps." The internet exploded again. Memes, quotes, reaction videos. The line, "even if no one claps," became a trending hashtag. It was printed on posters. It's printed on t-shirts. Painted on murals. It didn't matter that the video was old. It felt new. And it reminded people that Ford had been saying the same thing for years, only no one had listened. Meanwhile, inside the industry, executives started asking tough questions. What happened to real conversation? Why were interviews now rehearsed? Performances? Who decided that truth needed to be polished to be broadcast? A meeting was called at ABC. Senior producers, legal advisors, publicists, all trying to contain the wave before it crashed harder. Some wanted to invite Harrison back for a public reconciliation. Others knew he would never accept in a quiet corner of that same building. A junior producer, just 2 years into the job, opened her laptop and watched the full uncut segment of Ford's walkout for the 6th time. She didn't see an angry actor. She saw something else. Man tired of pretending. She turned to her colleague and whispered, "What if that's what everyone's waiting for? Someone who finally stops acting Evan in a place built for actors." That sentence stuck. By Monday, a new trend began. Other celebrities started speaking up, not in press tours, but in small spaces, quiet videos, unfiltered thoughts. One actress posted a selfie video with no makeup, no lighting, just her voice. "I've spent 15 years smiling through things that broke me. I watched Harrison Ford speak truth, and suddenly I didn't feel alone." The comments flooded in. Thousands of people, from teachers to taxi drivers, shared their own stories of burnout, silence, exhaustion. It was no longer about Hollywood. It was about everyone. And while all this unfolded, Harrison stayed silent. He was spotted briefly in a farmer's market near his Wyoming cabin. A fan tried to approach. Ford shook his hand, smiled softly, and said only one thing: "Don't believe everything you see on camera." Then he disappeared back into the trees. By the end of the week, the View's ratings had dropped. Not drastically, but noticeably. Not because people were angry, but because something had shifted. Audiences didn't want laughter if it wasn't honest. They didn't want questions if they were only meant to poke, not understand. In the media, something old had cracked, and something new, raw, uncertain, but real was starting to rise in its place. It was now 1 week since Harrison Ford had walked off The View, and though the media had tried to move on, the public hadn't. Newspapers were still running cover stories. A well-known radio host called it the most real moment on television in years. At universities, media ethics classes began discussing the incident as part of their curriculum. Students debated questions like, when does honesty become disruption? Should celebrities challenge platforms that control the narrative? In the middle of all this, something unexpected happened. A leak. A staffer from inside The View's production team anonymously shared a behind-the-scenes audio clip online. It was from moments after Harrison had walked off set. The clip caught panicked whispers between producers, Joy asking, "Did we push too far?" and Whoopi quietly saying, "I didn't expect him to break like that. I thought he could take it." The internet seized on those words. Break like that. That phrase hit a nerve. Some took it as proof of emotional cruelty. Others defended Whoopi, saying she had no way of knowing how heavy Ford's silence had been. But inside the entertainment world, message was growing clearer. Something had changed. Late-night hosts tried to joke about it, but the audience didn't laugh as loudly. In green rooms, actors whispered about interview requests they now wanted to cancel. Publicists began advising their clients to speak honestly but avoid confrontation. But even they knew there was no script for what was happening. On the 10th day, Ford's longtime friend and fellow actor, Jeff Bridges, gave a short interview with an independent journalist. "I spoke to him," Bridges said. "He's not angry, he's just done with fake rooms. It's been done for a long time, but none of us listened until now." The clip went viral. People began to ask deeper questions. Why do we expect artists to smile while breaking? Why are uncomfortable truths labeled drama? And who really gets to control the narrative? Back at The View, the pressure kept building. The network's leadership called a closed-door meeting to discuss damage control. One proposal suggested running a pre-recorded tribute segment about Harrison Ford's film career, trying to soften the impact of the walkout. Another suggestion, invite him back for a carefully scripted reconciliation. But none of it felt right, because the moment had already escaped their control. Meanwhile, far from New York, Ford stayed in the mountains. A reporter tried to reach him through his foundation. He declined, not angrily, just with a simple message: "I said what I had to say. The rest doesn't need an audience." That line was shared across thousands of posts, was quoted by authors, musicians. Activist Seven, a senator, used it in a speech about authenticity in leadership. Its cultural shift had started. People who had spent years hiding behind polite conversations now wanted to be heard, not just in Hollywood, in classrooms, in offices, in kitchens. People began posting videos saying things they'd kept inside for too long. "My boss talks about wellness, but punishes us for taking a day off. I smiled through my mother's funeral because I was told to stay strong. I laughed when I wanted to cry, just to keep peace in the room." Every story connected back to one image: Harrison Ford walking out, not in rage, but in quiet refusal. And then another surprise. An independent documentary surfaced. It was filmed quietly over the past year, capturing Ford working with young filmmakers in a mentorship program. It had no budget, no press team, and no release date. But someone leaked a short clip online. In it, Ford sits with 4 students in an old barn --studio. One student asks, "What's the most important thing you've learned after all these years?" Ford thinks for a long time before answering that it's better to leave the room than to stay and lie. The clip reached 100 million views in 4 days. By now, the conversation wasn't about celebrity anymore. It was about courage. about walking away when the cost of staying is too high, about choosing dignity over applause. At ABC, some executives suggested ending The View's season early. Others thought a format change might save it. But no one said out loud what everyone feared. The room had stopped feeling real, and in the silence that followed, one man's walkout had become more than a protest. It had become a turning point. The days kept passing, but the noise did not fade. Clips of Harrison Ford's walkout were now part of news montages and award show skits. But beneath all the internet chatter, something more serious was happening. The ripple was turning into a wave. Inside The View's production offices, the team was fractured. Some felt regret, others felt defensive. A few wanted to apologize publicly. But no one knew how, and no one was sure if it would make things better or worse. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the network's legal and PR teams were drafting statements they hoped would satisfy advertisers, who had started to quietly pull back. A cosmetics brand suspended their sponsorship. A beverage company canceled their next ad spot. Viewership dipped below its usual number for the third week in a row. Not drastically, but the decline was consistent. And the internet had stopped mocking. It was now just watching, waiting, and while the world debated Ford's silence, something else emerged. An old video, one that had never been aired before. It was raw footage from another show recorded nearly 10 years ago, where Harrison had briefly spoken about grief. It had been edited out of the final episode. Back then, producers had decided it was too serious. But now, the full version leaked. In it, Ford spoke slowly, carefully. His hands folded. "You don't always have the words when things break," he said. "But pretending nothing's broken, that's what keeps people sick." The clip spread like fire. People remembered his walkout not as an outburst, but as an extension of a long, quiet fight for honesty. And now that fight was no longer just his. Media students started organizing panel discussions. Activists linked the Ford moment to wider themes: mental health, workplace pressure, emotional exhaustion in public life. One university hosted an event called The Cost of Silence: Why Harrison Ford Walked Out. And then came the most unexpected moment of all. Whoopi Goldberg broke her silence again. But this time, not on air. It was a column, a personal, handwritten letter published in The Atlantic under the title, "What I Didn't See Coming." She wrote, "We've all spent years under bright lights. You learn to wear a smile like armor. But sometimes someone takes theirs off, and you remember what truth looks like. Harrison didn't insult us. He reminded us. He reminded me. That matters." The letter ended quietly. "I don't need to agree with everything he said. I respect why he said it, and I wish I had listened sooner." That column changed the entire tone of the story. It wasn't about blame anymore. It was about reflection. Suddenly, the audience turned softer. Tweets became more thoughtful. Think pieces grew deeper. Talk shows shifted the conversation from, "Did Harrison overreact?" to, "What does it mean when someone refuses to fake it anymore?" Then a journalist uncovered something else. During the same week of his walkout, Harrison had declined an invitation to a major Hollywood gala. The reason? He was attending the funeral of a longtime friend, a screenwriter who had been blacklisted for speaking out years earlier. At the funeral, someone had captured a photo. It showed Ford standing alone in the rain, no umbrella, holding a folded piece of paper. The caption read, "He stayed for the whole service. Didn't say much, just listened." That photo went viral. The world saw a man not just walking away from something, but walking toward something else. Something quieter, truer. And then came the final twist. Ford agreed to a single interview, not with a news anchor, not with a network, but with a 16-year-old high school journalist from Oregon, whose article titled "Honesty Needs No Applause" had touched him. The interview was filmed on a phone. No lights, no stage, just Ford in a chair answering softly. "I didn't walk out because I was angry," he said. "I walked out because I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep sitting in a room where pain was treated like content." He looked into the camera, serious but calm. Maybe the real job of a storyteller isn't to perform. Maybe it's to tell the truth even if no one claps, especially then. That clip shattered the internet. And quietly, without press releases or big productions. Harrison Ford had done something no actor had done in years. He'd changed the story, not with a film, not with a role, but with a refusal. To smile when he didn't mean it. And now every room he left behind was being forced to ask itself, what are we even clapping for? The fallout kept unfolding, but it no longer felt like a scandal. It felt like a reckoning. After Harrison Ford's quiet interview with the high school journalist, the conversation shifted again. It wasn't just trending anymore. It was being studied. Think tanks began referencing his walkout as a cultural flashpoint. Psychologists called it a model of moral resistance. Media analysts named it the Ford effect, a growing unwillingness to stay silent in environments built on performance and pressure. And then came the moment no one expected. ABC released a formal statement. It was long, careful, and filled with typical media language apologies for miscommunication, a promise to review internal practices, and a vague offer to better support guest well-being. But in the final paragraph, there was something different. It read, "We acknowledge that Mr. Ford's experience reflects a broader tension between authenticity and expectation in modern media. We respect his decision and we are listening." That line, "we are listening," felt important. But for many it was too late, because what started as one man walking off a stage had now inspired hundreds to speak: small actors, musicians, stage crew, publicists, even talk show interns. They all started sharing moments where they were told to smile when they wanted to scream, to stay silent when something inside them begged to speak. A new hashtag surfaced. Not performing anymore. It wasn't angry, it wasn't loud, it was quiet, raw, and relentless. One woman, a former entertainment reporter, posted, "I once cried in a restroom stall after being told I was too intense." For asking a grieving actor about his friend, "I never cried for asking. I cried because I didn't stop." Her post got 200,000 shares in a day. Meanwhile, inside Harrison Ford's world, things were shifting too. He received a private letter from a group of young filmmakers from Ukraine. They thanked him for showing that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's a line no one else has the courage to draw. Ford didn't reply publicly, but 2 weeks later, he quietly funded their next documentary. The film, Lines We Don't Cross, would later premiere in 3 countries. Back in the US, The View kept airing. But it was no longer the same show. Ratings had dropped steadily. A few advertisers had returned. But the damage to the brand wasn't about numbers, it was about trust. Joy Behar made fewer jokes. Whoopi was more measured, and the audience clapped less, not out of protest, but out of awareness. People were paying attention to the words now, listening between the lines, waiting to see if the hosts were talking or just performing. One day, a producer who'd worked on that infamous episode left the show. In a quiet blog post, she wrote, "We built sets to look like living rooms, but none of it felt like home." Harrison didn't just walk out of a studio, it walked out of an illusion. And suddenly, a conversation that had started in Hollywood reached Washington. Senator Karen Doyle, chair of the Senate Media Ethics Committee, referenced Ford's interview during a hearing on misinformation in political broadcasting. She said, "The question isn't why Harrison Ford walked away. It's why he was the only one willing to." That quote made the evening news. And it wasn't treated like a joke, was taken seriously. Because what Ford had done wasn't just personal. It had become a mirror held up to the culture. And then came the final ripple. A live panel was announced. at the Tribeca Film Festival titled The Performance Trap, when truth leaves the room. At first, people assumed Ford wouldn't attend. He'd avoided all major appearances since the walkout. But on the night of the panel, just as the crowd began to settle, the lights dimmed and Harrison walked onto the stage. No music. No spotlight. Just him. He sat down next to a filmmaker, a trauma therapist, and a veteran news anchor. His first words were soft. "I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here because I said no when I should have said it years ago." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. He continued. "What happened on that stage wasn't planned. It was just the moment I finally couldn't lie anymore. And maybe, just maybe, there's something freeing about walking away from the applause and choosing truth instead." It wasn't a speech, it was a release. And as he finished, he didn't wait for the room to respond. He simply nodded, stood, and walked off. No music followed, no commercials, just a room full of people who had stopped clapping and started thinking the performance was over, and something real had finally begun. It had been 3 months since Harrison Ford walked off the set of The View, but the impact still echoed far beyond any one studio. Media programs began quietly changing their formats, not all at once, not with big announcements, but with subtle shifts, fewer sound effects, fewer fake laughs, more moments of silence, the kind of silence that no longer felt awkward, the kind that made people listen. Late-night hosts, once quick with sarcasm, began pausing when interviews got emotional. Viewers noticed, so did their guests. Something was changing, and in the middle of it all, Harrison Ford disappeared again. Not into hiding, but into work. He was seen in Mexico, walking through villages devastated by drought. He met with indigenous leaders. He listened more than he spoke. A journalist captured one moment where Ford was sitting on a rock beside a broken pipeline, sleeves rolled up, helping a teenager fix a water valve. No cameras, no press release, just dirt on his boots and his hands in the work. That photo would become the cover of Time magazine's Silence of a Legend issue. Back home, a documentary was quietly released online. No trailer, no ad campaign, just a title, Still Here. It was directed by a small crew of independent filmmakers who had followed Ford after the walkout with his quiet permission. The film showed none of the glamour, none of the stardom. It was just Ford, traveling through places where stories were buried beneath noise, fire-scorched forests, abandoned film sets, forgotten towns. It ended with one line from Harrison, spoken while looking over a foggy valley at dawn. "Maybe stories aren't meant to be perfect. Maybe they're meant to remind us that something still matters." Critics called it haunting. Audiences called it brave. And then something even more unexpected happened. Whoopi Goldberg asked to meet Harrison Ford. It wasn't for TV. It wasn't for press. It was just two people in a quiet corner of a museum in New York. No mics, no cameras, just words. An assistant would later say they talked for over an hour. No one knows what was said. But when they stood to leave, Ford gave her a small nod. She gave one back. Sometimes peace doesn't need to be announced, just needs to be real. Back at The View, Joy Behar announced she would retire at the end of the season. She said, "I've had a long run. I've made people laugh, but maybe now it's time I learn to listen." The audience applauded, but it wasn't thunderous. It was soft. It was honest. The kind of applause that means something. In classrooms across the country, media professors added Harrison's story to their syllabus not as a celebrity scandal, but as a case study in emotional labor, media responsibility, and the line between truth and performance. One headline from The Guardian said it best: "He didn't yell, he didn't break, he just refused to be fake." And through it all, Harrison never returned to The View. He never gave a long interview, never went on a press tour, simply kept doing the work, quiet, steady, human. Years later, a young interviewer asked him during a small film panel, "Do you think walking off that show changed anything?" Harrison paused, then said, Maybe not the world, but maybe a few rooms, maybe a few people. The room fell quiet. No laughter, no clapping, just silence. The kind that tells you something real just happened. And in that moment, it was clear Harrison Ford didn't walk away from fame. He walked toward truth. And the world, ready or not, had to follow. Ask ChatGPT. The lights were bright, the music cheerful. The audience clapped with excitement as the hosts of The View took their seats. Everyone knew something special was about to happen. Harrison Ford, Hollywood icon, legend, and the face of some of the most powerful movie characters ever created, was walking onto the stage. He had come to promote what was supposed to be his final film in a beloved action franchise. It was meant to be light, nostalgic, a goodbye with grace. He walked out slowly. Not limping, but moving like a man who had carried too many stories for too long. The audience cheered. Whoopi Goldberg smiled wide as she introduced him. He sat down between her and Joy Behar, adjusting the mic on his jacket with hands that had once gripped blasters and bullwhips on screen. He offered a soft smirk. His voice, gravelly and deep, greeted the hosts with politeness. But his eyes looked tired. "Let's talk about your legacy," Whoopi said warmly. Indiana Jones, Han Solo, The Fugitive. What else is left for Harrison Ford to conquer? He gave a short laugh, but there was no joy in it. "I'm not looking to conquer anything," he said quietly. "I'm just trying to get through this press tour without losing my mind." The audience chuckled, unsure if it was a joke or something else, something darker. Something real. Sunny Hostin jumped in, trying to keep it playful. "Do you think your films still connect with younger people today? If studios stopped rebooting everything," Harrison replied, "maybe young people would see something new." It came out sharper than anyone expected. The room shifted slightly. Still smiles on faces, but now the air was thinner. Whoopi leaned forward, her tone still friendly, but her eyes sharper. "But don't you think your generation helped create that nostalgia trap? You guys made those characters so big, it's hard to move on from them. It's a fuse lit." Harrison turned slowly to look at her. His smile was gone. "My generation built stories," he said. "Yours is tearing them apart, one hot take at a time." The laughter stopped. Even the producers off stage paused. Joy tried to lighten the mood. "Sounds like we're all feeling a little cranky today," she joked. But no one laughed. Whoopi's face changed. The warmth was gone. Her voice was firmer now. "You think we're the problem?" she said. "We're the ones still sitting at this table, trying to have real conversations while people like you storm off when things get uncomfortable." A long silence followed. Harrison's jaw tightened. He looked at the floor, then back at Whoopi. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Uncomfortable," he said. "You mean honest? You mean the kind of honesty you can't put in a soundbite? The kind you can't edit for applause?" Whoopi didn't blink. "You're not the only one with scars, Harrison. We've all been through it. But some of us stay in the chair and do the work." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I've done the work," he said finally. "I've buried friends. I've watched art become noise. I've stayed silent while this industry laughed through the collapse of everything. That used to mean something. And now I'm here, being told how to feel by a panel show." He reached for the mic on his jacket and peeled it off slowly, as if every movement was a final word. Then, without saying anything else, he stood up. The camera didn't cut away. He walked off the stage. The room was silent. The hosts sat frozen. A few audience members clapped nervously, then stopped. No one knew what to do. No one expected. It docked within 10 minutes. The clip was all over social media. Harrison Ford walks out on The View. Ford versus Whoopi. Live TV breakdown. Hollywood legend drops. Mike literally hashtags exploded. Hashtag Ford vs. Whoopi. Hashtag Hollywood truth. Hashtag The View uncut it. Wasn't just a walkout. It was something deeper. Something raw. A moment when a man who had spent his whole life inside a system suddenly spoke outside the script. And the world couldn't look away. The video had barely stopped recording when the internet caught fire. Within minutes, Harrison Ford's exit from The View was the top trending topic across every major platform. News outlets scrambled to get quotes. Talk shows scrambled to react. Commentators, influencers, and even actors chimed in from around the world. Some called it a meltdown. Others called it the most honest thing they'd ever seen on live television. Inside the ABC building, the tension was electric. Producers and PR managers moved in silence, eyes locked on phones and studio monitors. Someone from network leadership had already called down. Legal was involved now. Advertisers were nervous. Every decision suddenly felt like it could tip something bigger. Whoopi Goldberg sat in her dressing room, still in full makeup, holding her phone and scrolling through the comments. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed the storm inside. Last words with Harrison replayed in her mind. She had faced tough interviews before, but this one had left a mark. Backstage, the other co-hosts gathered in awkward silence. Joy tried to joke about it, but no one laughed this time. Sunny looked shaken. Sarah looked like she wanted to cry. The energy from the audience had shifted, from confusion to shock. On the outside, the world reacted fast. Clips of the interview flooded every screen. Edited versions, raw versions, side-by-sides with old Harrison Ford interviews where he talked about his love for storytelling and the decay of cinema. Old clips of Whoopi defending creative expression resurfaced too, but this time, her words felt colder, rehearsed. Film critics started writing think pieces within hours. One headline read, "Hollywood's final truth-teller walks off said tanned." "We're still not listening." Another asked, "Was this the end of polite celebrity interviews?" Meanwhile, Harrison Ford didn't speak. No tweets, no public statements, no press appearances. He had boarded a private jet just after leaving the studio. The flight plan showed he was headed to Wyoming, where he owned a quiet cabin away from cameras and studios. No one knew if he'd even come back. His silence made the moment bigger. People projected their own pain, frustration, and anger onto it. Some said it was about age and relevance. Others said it was about truth versus performance. But one thing everyone agreed on: it had not been fake. Whoopi finally addressed the moment on her Instagram Live. Her voice was calm but guarded. "Look," she said, "we ask questions. Sometimes those questions touch nerves. That's the job." Harrison had every right to walk off. That was his choice. But let's not pretend there's only one side to this. It didn't land well. Thousands of comments poured in. He spoke. "You deflected. This isn't about questions. It's about respect. You crossed a line and tried to smile through it." Meanwhile, small, quiet posts began to spread from people inside the industry. Writers, directors, retired crew members. Many shared personal stories how Ford had defended them, fought for budgets, refused to let studios erase people's work. They talked about the man behind the scenes, grumpy, yes, but loyal, honest, protective of what art used to mean. A photo surfaced. It showed Harrison Ford sitting alone in a bar in Montana, head down, a half-drunk glass in front of him. He looked like a man who didn't care about headlines. He looked like a man who'd said everything he needed to say. That photo was shared 12 million times in a day. Back at ABC, the pressure was rising. The network's PR team drafted multiple responses each, one softer than the last. But they couldn't escape what the audience already felt. Something real had happened on that stage, something no amount of spin could erase. Inside the entertainment world, the ripples turned to waves. A streaming platform quietly shelved a panel show that had been built to mock celebrity culture. A major film festival announced a new theme: authenticity in the age of noise. Whoopi returned to The View the next day. The producers kept her opening remarks short. No recap, no emotional tribute, just back to regular segments. But the chairs felt emptier, the smiles thinner, the laughs quieter. And out there, in a quiet cabin far from Hollywood, Harrison Ford sat in silence, watching the storm he had not planned but maybe, deep down, had always seen coming.